Every U-boat that sailed from occupied France needed hands to build and maintain the base it sailed from, and Germany did not have nearly enough of its own to do the job. When the Kriegsmarine took over the French naval yard at Lorient in the summer of 1940, it counted on skilled labor it could not supply from home. A wartime request for 2,700 trained workers to staff the new Atlantic coast bases went out to the naval yard at Wilhelmshaven, which had barely 3,300 workers on its own books to begin with, most of them already spoken for elsewhere. The gap got filled the way it had to get filled, with French labor. Thousands of French tradesmen reporting each morning to build and repair the machines that were sinking Allied ships in the ocean beyond their own harbor. In the spring of 1945, after the occupying garrison at Lorient surrendered, the town learned something about one of its own that nobody there had suspected. Jacques Stosskopf, deputy director of naval construction at the base, a man plenty of his neighbors had quietly written off as a collaborator across 4 straight years of occupation, had spent that entire stretch of time reporting on the submarines under his own supervision to British intelligence. The case against him, while he was alive to answer it, had looked solid enough. He was Alsatian and spoke fluent German, an asset in the occupier's eyes and a warning sign in his neighbors. He kept his post under the occupation rather than walking away from it, and he carried the kind of access that let him move through the Karaman construction pens with German clearance, counting hulls, while the men who built the boats with their own hands resented him the whole time for the ease of it. When he disappeared from Lorient in February of 1944, most people who noticed drew the obvious conclusion that 4 years of loyal service had finally been rewarded, and the Germans had moved him somewhere better, reading of him that was wrong from top to bottom. Stosskopf had trained as a naval engineer at the École Polytechnique and served with distinction in the previous war. By 1939, he was running the new construction unit at the Lorient Arsenal under French command, and he stayed at his post when the Germans arrived the following June. Admiral Karl Donitz picked Lorient as one of 5 French ports for his U-boat fleet within days of the German army reaching it, and ordered up the enormous reinforced pens that would shrug off years of Allied bombing without a single submarine inside them ever taking damage. Building that took the same skilled hands Stosskopf had once supervised for France. Tens of thousands of cubic meters of concrete poured over walls thick enough that nothing in the Allied bomb bays of the war would ever crack them. The Royal Air Force and the Americans tried anyway. Over 5 weeks in early 1943, they dropped more than 4,000 tons of bombs on Lorient, killing over 200 people and flattening roughly 9 buildings out of every 10 in the town around the base. Inside the pens, at the peak of that same bombing campaign, 28 U-boats sat under 7 meters of reinforced roof and came out the other side without a mark on them. Not one submarine berthed inside Karaman was ever damaged by an air raid for the rest of the war. A German assessment drawn up in October of 1942 laid out how deep the dependency on that labor ran, pulling French dockyard workers out of the Atlantic bases. The report concluded would end surface fleet repair work outright and cut U-boat repair capacity by close to 1/3. The Navy needed a workforce it did not fully trust and had no working alternative to trusting it anyway. Stosskopf understood that arithmetic better than most people in the building because he was one of the men who had to make it balance every week. He used the trust his position bought him almost from the start of the occupation, passing details of submarine movements and pen layouts onward through channels that reached the Alliance network, one of the largest intelligence organizations the French resistance ever ran. An outfit the Gestapo itself nicknamed Noah's Ark, because so many of its agents worked under animal code names. When Stosskopf's own reporting became tied to alliance rather than running through some earlier looser channel is not settled in what survives of the record, post-war accounts place the connection anywhere from the autumn of 1940 to as late as 1942, and nobody who could have pinned the date down lived long enough to be asked. He kept no written notes and took no photographs regardless of which year it started in. Everything went into memory first and onto paper once it had already left the base by other hands, which is one reason his own account of what he reported, and how much of it reached London in what shape, does not survive in his own words. What survives instead is the shape of the damage that followed behind it. Scattered across a dozen individual boats and their patrol logs, underneath Stosskopf's own quiet channel, a separate and far less subtle war ran through the same dockyards. French tradesmen forced to keep German submarines seaworthy did not need training in espionage to slow a repair down or get it a little wrong. A weld that looked finished could fail under pressure at depth. A fuel line could develop a hole nobody drilled on purpose, so far as the paperwork was concerned. Electrical runs and radar sets came back from the shop with faults that had not been there when the boat went in for work. No submarine soaked up more of that pattern than U-505. She had already survived the worst damage of any U-boat to make it home under her own power, after a patrol aircraft put a bomb through her foredeck in December of 1942, blowing off her deck gun and breaching the hull. The same blast caught the low-flying bomber in its own shrapnel and brought it down with its crew, so that both sides lost something to that one encounter before either side had won it. Flooded and listing U-505 limped back to Lorient on reduced power, while her own crew fought to keep her afloat. Repairs ate 6 months. When she put to sea again the following summer, her first patrol back lasted 13 days and ended with 3 British destroyers on her tail and nothing sunk to show for it. What came after that hurt morale worse than any single engagement had. 4 aborted patrols across August alone. Most of them turned back within 2 days of clearing the harbor, followed by a 5th attempt in September that ran a full 13 days without ever reaching open water in fighting order. 6 launches, 6 returns, every one of them on a fault nobody in the crew had caused and nobody at the base could account for. The base had a name for it before anyone had a diagnosis. Someone painted a sign in the docking area calling the boat's own berth her hunting ground, since engine trouble was the only thing she ever seemed to catch. One rival captain, overheard by U-505's own commander, joked that there was one man in the whole flotilla certain to come home every time, Zizek. Nobody standing close enough to hear it mistook it for a compliment, and none of them found it funny again once they learned what the joke cost him. Across her whole career, spread over 12 patrols and years of this kind of trouble, U-505 managed to sink 8 ships, a modest total for a boat that had been at sea on and off since the start of 1942. Capitan Lieutenant Peter Zizek had taken command carrying a strong record, an Iron Cross from an earlier posting and a reputation built on it. None of that carried over once U-505 was his, and the run of failures that were nobody's fault settled onto him regardless, the way command failures tend to settle regardless of where the fault sits. When the boat broke her run in October and reached open water at last, British destroyers found her off the Azores inside 2 weeks and drove her under with a depth charge attack that would not let up. Somewhere in the middle of it, with the hull ringing from explosions she could not answer, Zizek shot himself in the submarine's own control room in front of the men serving under him. His first watch officer took command on the spot and brought the boat home. More than one senior officer urged Admiral Donitz to break the crew apart afterward, standard practice for a boat whose morale had visibly collapsed. He refused on the grounds that the story would do more damage loose in the fleet than it would sealed inside one boat's crew list, which was itself an admission that the story was already worth containing rather than denying. A boat that had already been the base's private joke was now something nobody at Lorient wanted to joke about at all. Set Stosskopf's memorized reports and the ordinary sabotage running beneath him in the same yard against the numbers the U-boat arm produced by the war's end. Germany built something over 1,100 submarines. Most of them died young. Close to 800 were lost outright. Well past half of everything the Kriegsmarine ever put to sea. And of the 40,000 men who crewed them, close to 30,000 never came home. Lorient's own 10th flotilla alone ran something like 80 boats through its pens before the base was surrendered. No single report Stosskopf carried. And no single drilled hole or bad weld at Lorient explains a fraction of that Atlantic on its own. Measured against a war that size, one man's memory was a single brick. The Gestapo arrested him at Vannes on the 21st of February 1944. After a captured agent from his own network named him under torture. What he told his interrogators, if he told them anything, is not part of the record that survives him. What is recorded is that the rest of his network stayed intact after his arrest, which is its own kind of answer. Officers deported him under the Nacht und Nebel program, designed specifically to make prisoners disappear without a trace for family to follow. And a firing squad at the camp of Natzweiler-Struthof killed him on the 1st of September 1944. 8 months before the town he had spied from would even learn there was anything to grieve. His neighbors believed, for the better part of a year after he vanished, that the occupiers had simply promoted a loyal collaborator and sent him east to enjoy the reward. He never corrected them. There was no chance to, and every account that survives him suggests he would not have taken it, even if the chance had come sooner. The whole design of what he did depended on no one finding out until it stopped mattering whether they did. The truth came out only after the war ended. When France awarded him the Legion of Honor and the story of what the Deputy Director of Naval Construction had been doing reached the town where he had lived throughout the occupation. In July 1946, the submarine base at Lorient was renamed in his honor. The same reinforced pens the Germans had built to survive anything the Allies could drop on them now carrying a French name over the gate. The base kept working long after that, repairing a different Navy's own submarines for another 50 years before it closed in 1997, the concrete outlasting every flag ever flown over it. What the town could not afford to demolish became a maritime museum instead. The wet docks where U-505 once limped home now open for visitors to walk through on the same tide schedule the U-boats once kept. Nobody wrote down which worker drilled which hole in which fuel tank or which weld got left bad on purpose rather than by accident. That absence is not a gap the record failed to fill. It was the design working exactly as the men who built it intended, and it held for the entire war.